The job market wasn't kind when both my husband and I were laid off in the same week. It felt like life had yanked the rug from beneath our feet. We'd always been the sort of couple who kept an emergency fund, watched our spending, and planned for the worst. But no amount of planning prepares you for job hunting in a sluggish economy with bills piling up and mouths to feed. So, when I got a job offer, even if it was a step down from my previous role, I took it. The pay wasn't ideal, and it didn't come with the prestige or growth I'd grown accustomed to, but at least it was stability. Or so I thought. At first, things seemed manageable. My direct manager, Gary, was a busy guy, clearly juggling too many responsibilities. Still, he seemed kind and reasonable, and when he introduced me to the rest of the team, the dynamic felt warm and welcoming. There was camaraderie, a shared determination. I could work with this. But then came Jane. On paper, Jane wasn't even supposed to be my manager. My title didn't reflect it, nor did the company hierarchy. I was simply supposed to act as a liaison between Jane's team and ours, ensure seamless communication, manage overlap, keep things flowing. It sounded simple enough. But Jane had other plans. Almost from the beginning, she decided I was her subordinate. Not an equal, not a collaborator, an assistant. A subordinate to micromanage. It started with little things. She'd insist I forward every email related to any cross-functional project, even those that clearly didn't require her oversight. She'd forget to invite me to meetings and then blame me for being out of the loop. But over the next few weeks, the minor inconveniences escalated into full-blown harassment. She'd ping me during lunch breaks demanding quick calls that turned into full strategy sessions. She'd call at odd hours. 11 p.m. on a Sunday wasn't off limits if something crossed her mind. And if I didn't respond immediately, she'd log it, point it out later in meetings, frame it like I wasn't committed enough to the team. Then there were the comments. At first, veiled under the guise of concern. "You've been gaining weight, haven't you?" she'd say, not even making eye contact. "That's dangerous for someone your size, especially for our race." I remember blinking at my screen, frozen, trying to decide if I had heard her right. It didn't stop at that one remark. She had a habit of slipping personal jabs into professional conversations. Comments about my body, my family, even my accent. I knew better than to internalize them, but it wore me down. Brick by brick, insult by insult, she was dismantling the wall I had built to keep my professional confidence intact. I tried to push back. I really did. I'd stand my ground, question her tone, clarify boundaries, but every time I did, she retaliated. Meetings suddenly rescheduled at times I couldn't make. Feedback filtered through Gary was laced with vague critiques. "She needs to work on her attitude. She's not a team player." I kept it all to myself at first. We needed the income too badly to risk me losing the job. My husband was still searching and the bills didn't care if I was being mistreated. So I endured. I gritted my teeth, ignored the slights, and focused on the paycheck. Until one Friday afternoon. I was already on edge. That week had been emotionally grueling. We'd just buried a relative after a sudden illness, and the funeral expenses had drained what little savings we had left. I was emotionally raw. So when Jane called to berate me for scheduling a meeting without looping in someone I'd never heard of, she didn't ask, didn't explain, just shouted, I snapped. I broke down. I didn't yell back. I didn't argue. I simply ended the call and walked straight into Gary's office. I didn't bother sugarcoating anything. I sat down, and for the first time, I told him everything. The phone calls. The insults. The invasive comments about my body. How she made me cancel vacation days I'd planned for months. How I stayed up until midnight revising slides she hadn't even opened. To his credit, Gary didn't try to downplay it. His face was grave, his eyes heavy. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I believe you. I've had concerns about Jane for a while." I expected the typical managerial response, something like "let's bring HR into this" or "let's document everything," but instead, Gary made a decision on the spot. "I'm moving you to another team. Under me. No more contact with Jane." I was stunned. Grateful, but stunned. It felt like someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. For a while, things got better. My new team respected me. Gary didn't micromanage, he trusted me to do my job, and I thrived under that kind of leadership. I started to regain confidence, to feel normal again. But Jane wasn't done. She didn't take the reassignment well. She kept emailing me, CCing others, framing tasks like I was still under her. I ignored her messages, but that only made her escalate. One day, she marched right up to my desk and loudly accused me of being incompetent, unqualified, lazy. People turned their heads. Eyes widened. Gary was there within seconds. "Jane," he said firmly, "this is inappropriate." But she didn't care. She stormed off like she was the victim. At that point, I knew this wouldn't stop. As long as she was there, she'd find a way to undermine me. She'd made me her project, her scapegoat. And I was done being her punching bag. So I made a choice. I sat at my desk that night, and I wrote my resignation letter. It wasn't a quiet one. I wrote everything down, the insults, the harassment, the comments about my weight and ethnicity. I attached a document listing all the offensive things she had said over the past few months, 3 pages long. I CC'd Gary, HR, and every member of leadership I'd interacted with. And then I walked out, head high. Those next few months were the hardest of my life. We had to cut down to the bare essentials. Some days we ate only toast and rice to stretch what little we had. I applied to every job I could find, sent out dozens of resumes a week, customized every cover letter. I cried in silence some nights so my husband wouldn't hear. Pride wouldn't let me show how scared I really was. But I kept going. And then, a miracle. A month into unemployment, I saw a press release pop up in my LinkedIn feed. A former executive I used to work with, let's call him Marcus, had just accepted a senior leadership role at the same company I had left. It stopped me cold. I'd worked closely with Marcus for years at my previous job. We'd collaborated on major campaigns, developed high-stakes strategies, even spent long nights working across time zones to get launches right. We weren't exactly close friends, but there had always been mutual respect. He once told me I was the only person he'd ever met who could make data sexy. On impulse, I shot him a quick text, "Congrats on the new gig. Let me know if you ever want a download on the team. Lots of potential there." I expected a polite thanks and nothing more. But Marcus replied almost immediately, "Got time for a call this week?" We set up a short video chat the next afternoon. I gave him the honest truth, what I loved about the company, where the gaps were, and what I thought could be improved. I didn't badmouth Jane. I didn't even bring her up. What I didn't expect was his next question, "How open are you to coming back?" I paused. "That depends. I'd need to know I wouldn't be under the same leadership structure." "Not only would you not be under it," he said with a grin, "you'd be helping shape it." He offered me a role as his chief of staff. At first, I couldn't breathe. I had to mute the call so he wouldn't hear the way I gasped. This was it, the moment every burnt-out, overworked, humiliated employee dreams of. A chance not just to return, but to return in a position of real power. To make change. To correct the culture. I accepted. A few weeks later, we had our first all-hands call. A hybrid setup, dozens in person in the largest conference room, many more dialing in remotely. I hadn't made a public announcement yet, so Jane had no idea what was coming. Marcus gave his usual commanding welcome speech. Charismatic, crisp, confident. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "I'd also like to introduce a few key members of my leadership team who will be helping shape our next chapter. You'll be seeing a lot of them." He rattled off a few names. Then, and returning to the company as chief of staff, insert protagonist's name. The room turned. I saw her. Jane, sitting dead center, froze. There was no polite smile, no attempt to fake composure. Just stunned disbelief, her mouth slightly agape. Her expression was the same as the one she had worn that day at my desk, when she called me unqualified. The same disdain, but now laced with panic. Because now I outranked her. 2 levels above, to be precise. I didn't look away. I nodded once, politely. then turned to answer a question from someone else. Gary was at the back of the room and caught my eye. He gave me a quick thumbs up. After the meeting, he came over, shook my hand, and said, "You deserve this. We all saw what she did to you." For a few weeks, Jane kept her head down. She didn't come near me, didn't say a word beyond the occasional forced smile in the hallway. But then, as predictable as ever, she showed her true colors. Marcus forwarded me an email one afternoon. The subject line was concern about Chief of Staff appointment. Inside was a message from Jane. Rambling. Unhinged. She painted herself as the victim. Claimed I had targeted her during my previous tenure, that I'd lied and manipulated my way into this new role. She called me unqualified and a liability, and warned that I would damage Marcus's reputation if I stayed. She didn't even attempt professionalism. What she didn't know was that Marcus had already done his homework. He knew I had been a director at his competitor firm, someone he respected, even feared. He'd seen my results firsthand. My resume had passed his desk years ago before I ever joined his team. Her email wasn't just rude, it was embarrassing. Marcus asked me for context. I gave him the full story. I forwarded my resignation letter, still stored on the company drive, along with the document listing Jane's inappropriate remarks. I didn't embellish. I didn't have to. Gary backed me up immediately. He told Marcus everything, how Jane had pushed out half her team, how HR complaints had piled up, how I'd been reassigned in an attempt to de-escalate, only for her to continue the harassment. But that wasn't all. In my first 2 weeks back, I'd made a point to check in with some of Jane's former team members, many of whom had left the company quietly, without explanation. What I heard was chilling. Verbal abuse. Public shaming. Micromanagement so intense people were developing anxiety attacks. Some even had emails they'd saved, documents of how Jane had berated them, accused them of incompetence, ignored their medical leave requests. I compiled it all into a single internal report for Marcus. I didn't demand action. I simply said, "I think you should read this." 2 days later, Jane was called into a meeting with HR. Her desk was cleared by 3 p.m. By 5 p.m., she was gone. No announcement. No farewell email. Just silence. That night, my inbox flooded. Quiet thank yous. Old colleagues who had left messaging to say they were watching from the sidelines and cheering. Even a few of Jane's former allies reached out to apologize for not believing me sooner. I didn't respond to them all. I didn't need to. I just sat at my desk, stared out the window, and let the moment sink in. For so long, I had felt powerless. Voiceless. Broken. But now, I wasn't just back. I was in charge. Jane's firing wasn't some grand public spectacle. There were no fireworks, no final meltdown in the cafeteria. But the silence that followed spoke volumes. People noticed. Whispers circulated through every department. Did you hear? Is she really gone? What happened? And soon, the truth leaked. Not from me. From the people who had suffered under her and were finally free to speak. There was a shift in the air. The staff who had survived Jane's reign started coming forward, not just to vent, but to reconnect. For the first time, we had a space where people felt like they could breathe again. Meetings were more relaxed. Managers began listening. People started collaborating instead of competing. Marcus pulled me aside a few days later. "This company's got good bones," he said, "but people like Jane rot the structure from the inside. You did the right thing." Still, I kept waiting for some part of me to feel guilty. Vindictive. Cruel. But that part never came. Instead, I felt relief. Calm. Control. A few weeks after Jane's departure, I got a message from one of her former reports, a junior analyst named Tara. She had transferred teams quietly right before I'd left the company the first time, and I remembered her as a kind, quiet overachiever, always staying late, always volunteering. "I just wanted to say thank you," she wrote. "I almost quit this industry altogether because of her. You being back has given people hope again." That message hit hard. Because I remembered being Tara. I remembered being micromanaged to the point of breaking. Working through weekends. Dreading every incoming email. questioning my own worth. It reminded me why I took this role in the first place. So I got to work. Over the next 3 months, Marcus and I revamped the entire management structure of the department. We instituted new leadership trainings focused on empathy, clarity, and transparency. We surveyed employees anonymously about their team leads, identifying problem areas before they could metastasize. We brought in HR not as a weapon, but as a partner. We also made space for recovery. Quiet rooms for mental resets. Floating wellness days for teams who had hit major milestones. Quarterly state of the team town halls where anyone could ask leadership questions anonymously or otherwise. The transformation was slow, but steady. And by the time our end-of-quarter report was due, we had the highest retention rate in that department in over 5 years. One evening, I stayed late to finish reviewing onboarding materials for a new hire starting the following week. The office was mostly empty, just the hum of computers and the occasional keyboard click echoing off the glass walls. Gary passed by, heading toward the elevators. He paused at my door and leaned in. "You're doing great work here," he said. "Jane never understood that leadership isn't control. It's trust. You've reminded all of us what it looks like." I thanked him, but didn't say more. After all, Gary had tried his best too, just in a system that didn't empower him when it counted. Still, it meant something coming from him. After he left, I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights flickered in a soft evening haze. Cars snaked through the streets below. The kind of view I never thought I'd have again, not after the breakdown, the debt, the hopelessness. I thought of my husband, how we'd stayed up late counting coins just to afford a single tank of gas. I thought of the nights we'd eaten toast with peanut butter while pretending it was a meal. Of the resumes I'd sent into the void. Of how close I came to quitting not just the company, but everything. And now I was here. Not because I got lucky, but because I stood back up. Again and again. Jane had broken something in me. But she'd also unknowingly lit a fire. She thought I was weak. She mistook my silence for submission. She underestimated what I could become once I got out from under her thumb. And now, she was gone. I was leading. And I wasn't done yet. He thought screaming at a 19-year-old intern in front of the entire office would make him look powerful. Instead, it marked the beginning of his downfall and my rise to the position he never deserved. If you've ever worked under a manager who used fear as a weapon, this one's for you. And if you've ever wished you could do more than just quit and walk away, just wait until you see how sweet it feels when karma is delivered, with interest. Before we get into it, don't forget to hit that like button if this sounds like your kind of justice, subscribe for more real revenge stories, and drop a comment below telling us the worst boss you've ever had. This all happened in a European country, I won't say which one, and while it might sound like something from a Netflix series, I promise it's 100% real. And now that it's all behind me, I can finally share it. Let's rewind 7 years. I had just completed my apprenticeship as a machine operator at a mid-sized factory. It was a clean and well-paying place to work, and once I got certified, I spent about a month on the production floor before being asked to help out temporarily in the sales and quality department. My boss at the time needed someone to cover vacations, and I figured why not? Better hours, less physical work, and I already understood the product line better than most. After all, I'd been building the stuff myself for a year. That temporary cover turned into a permanent spot. Apparently, I made a good impression. I was offered a full-time place in the department, and from there, my journey really started. I moved from machine operator to sales, then into quality and training, gradually picking up certifications and responsibility as the team expanded from 5 people to 15. Then last year, everything changed. Our department manager retired in the fall. That alone was a big shift. He'd been a father figure to most of us, calm, experienced, and fair. After the holidays, we were introduced to our new boss, a guy just a few years older than me, brash, arrogant, and worst of all, completely power-hungry. His name was Felix. And Felix came into that office like a wrecking ball. The first week, he barely spoke to any of us. Just watched. Took notes. Analyzed. It wasn't long before we realized that he wasn't looking to lead, he was looking to dominate. And unfortunately, the first target of his bullying was the newest member of our team, a 19-year-old trainee I'll call Lena. She had joined just before the holidays, bright-eyed and full of potential. I'd personally trained her, and yeah, she made some small mistakes, everyone does. But she was picking things up quickly, and honestly, she was doing better than most of us had in our first month. None of that mattered to Felix. On a Tuesday morning, I came into the office to find Lena at her desk, head down, shoulders shaking. She'd been crying. I asked what happened, and she barely managed to explain. She'd filled out the wrong internal form on a client order, a mistake that, at most, would take 5 minutes to fix. But Felix had found the error first. And instead of just correcting it or offering some feedback, he had publicly exploded on her. "You stupid little slut," he'd screamed. "How dumb can you be to mess up something this simple? I should fire you and make sure you never work in this industry again." She was mortified, humiliated, sobbing in front of everyone. He didn't stop. He stormed off and slammed the door to his office like a teenager throwing a tantrum. The rest of the team stared, speechless. I was beyond furious. This wasn't just bad management, it was abuse. I took Lena to get a coffee and brought her to the department's office. Grandma, an older colleague who'd been with the company for decades and always knew how to comfort anyone. While she took care of Lena, I told the rest of the team what had happened. Their reaction? Outrage. 3 of them, veterans who had been with the company for 25 years, walked into Felix's office and quit on the spot. His response? "You're all worthless and overpaid." He didn't even blink. He thought he was untouchable. And that's when we knew this wasn't going to stop unless we made it stop. By the end of the day, the rest of the department had agreed to resign in protest. Everyone, except me. I had a specific reason for staying, for now. See, Felix had no idea that we had a massive audit coming up in 3 weeks from one of our biggest clients. An audit worth between 15 to 20 million euros in contract value. And I was the only certified person in the company qualified to prepare for it. If we failed, we'd lose the account. So I played my part. The next morning, Felix stormed into the office. "Why the hell did everyone quit?" he barked at me. I stared him down. "Maybe because you're a sexist pig and an asshole?" I said calmly. "What did you just say, you little shit?" "You heard me. And by the way, do you remember the audit from Client X?" "Yeah. What about it?" "I'm the only one certified to prepare for it." He hesitated. That was the first time I saw real fear cross his face. So I quit too. I'm not going to work under someone like you. Good luck passing that audit." And with that, I turned around and walked out. I said goodbye to everyone I knew on the factory floor. I made sure my departure wasn't quiet. It was public. Deliberate. On my way out, I ran into the vice president of production. He could tell something was wrong. When I told him the story, he was livid. He pulled out his phone and called the CEO. "Robert, the shit has hit the fan," he said. "Get down to the floor. Now. Is it that serious? If you want to pass the audit in 3 weeks, move your ass." 10 minutes later, the CEO arrived with the full executive team in tow. We gathered in the middle of the factory floor, all eyes on us. The VP turned to me. "Tell them." I did. I told them everything. What Felix said. What he did. The resignations. The broken team. The looming audit. The CEO was stunned. "How do we fix this?" he asked. "Fire him," I said. "And replace him with someone who actually knows how to lead." He paused. "Would you take the role?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." He nodded. "Let's go make that happen." We walked straight into my old office, now soon to be mine again, in a whole new capacity. Felix was inside, sipping his coffee like a king on his throne. "Back to beg for your job," he sneered. Pathetic. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside. The CEO came around the corner. "Felix," he said coldly, "get the fuck out of my company. You're fired. And I'll personally make sure that every company in this industry knows exactly what you did." Felix went pale. Speechless. He stammered something about contracts and procedures, but no one was listening anymore. The CEO turned to security and said, "Escort him out." But that wasn't all. He called the police. He reported Felix for harassment and trespassing, just to make it clear this wasn't a joke. Felix left in handcuffs. I sat down at my new desk. My old team stood behind me, smiling. And the CEO turned to me and said, "Name your price." I asked for a €70,000 raise. He nodded. I added, "There's also the matter of the bonus pool." He raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "I don't want it. Split it among the team. Give everyone a 15% raise. They earned it more than I did." He smiled. Done. We passed the audit with flying colors. The client was thrilled. And Felix? Last I heard, he's still trying to find someone who'll hire him. That's what happens when you abuse power. Eventually, you run out of people willing to play along. It's funny how quickly things change once people start listening to the right voices. After Felix was escorted out, everything shifted. The mood in the building lifted almost instantly. You could feel the tension release from everyone's shoulders. No more dread in the mornings. No more hushed conversations in break rooms. No more watching someone you respect get torn down for no reason other than a manager's fragile ego. The CEO stayed in the office with me for the rest of the day. We reviewed the audit plan, broke down the logistics, and restructured the leadership tree to make sure nothing like this would ever happen again. But before any of that, I had one request. "I want my team reinstated," I told him. "Every single one of them. Same contracts. Same pay. Plus the 15% raise we agreed on." He nodded without hesitation. "They've earned it," he said. And just like that, the calls went out. It was one of the most emotional experiences of my life, watching each of them return one by one. Some came back the next day. Some needed the weekend to cool off. But they all returned. Even Lena. She was the last one to walk through the door, still unsure if she belonged here after what she'd been through. I met her at the entrance, handed her a fresh badge, and told her, "You do. More than ever." That first week back, we worked like a machine. Everyone pitched in, no task was too small. It wasn't just about the audit anymore. It was about proving to ourselves, and to the entire company, that decency and competence could still win. And we did it. We passed the audit with 0 flags. Not a single correction or concern. The auditor even commented on how organized and transparent everything was. The client was so impressed, they extended their contract by 5 years and offered additional work we hadn't even bid for. That one win ended up securing over €40 million in future business for the company. But what mattered more to me was what it represented: a new culture. A culture where people weren't afraid to speak up. Where ideas were shared without fear. Where a mistake was a learning opportunity, not an excuse for verbal assault. Where leadership meant support, not tyranny. That first month in the new role was intense. I spent long nights reorganizing training programs, updating policies, and meeting with every single member of the department individually to hear their thoughts, frustrations, and ideas. I even implemented a new system where we held monthly anonymous feedback sessions, so if anyone felt like they couldn't speak directly, they'd still have a voice. I wasn't trying to be the cool boss. I just remembered what it felt like to have someone misuse power. I'd lived it. I'd watched others suffer under it. And I had sworn to myself that if I ever found myself in charge, I'd never forget what it felt like to be on the other side. 2 months in, things were humming. Turnover dropped to 0. Productivity shot up. Even the factory floor, which had always viewed our department as stuck-up office types, started to appreciate our transparency and support. We partnered more, collaborated more, and the divide between blue-collar and white-collar started to blur. And the recognition came fast. The board took notice. I was invited to present our department's turnaround at a company-wide summit. I didn't sugarcoat what had happened. I named the toxicity. I named the shift. And I shared exactly how we built it back. The applause after that speech is something I'll never forget. Not because it was about me, but because it validated the entire team's efforts. We had proven that when good people stick together and stand up for each other, real change is possible. But just when I thought things had calmed down, Felix made a reappearance. No, he didn't show up at the office, he knew better than that. But I got a message on LinkedIn one evening. It was from a recruiter I knew. "Hey, just a heads up. A guy named Felix listed your company as a former employer. I figured you might want to know since I saw you're connected." Attached was his CV. It was full of lies. Claimed he led a team of 30. Said he implemented the very audit process I had designed. Even included a falsified performance award supposedly signed by the CEO. I sat there for a few minutes, debating whether to get involved. But then I thought about Lena. About the 3 veterans he drove out. About the storm he brought into a place we had worked so hard to rebuild. I called the recruiter. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "I'm happy to give you a professional reference." What followed was a 10-minute explanation, calm, measured, honest. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts were enough. She thanked me, and I never heard about Felix again. To this day, I don't know if he ever found another leadership position. But I do know this: he'll never again work for any of the companies we partner with. The word spread fast. Sometimes the best revenge is simply the truth making its rounds. A few weeks after that, Lena came to my office. "I've decided I want to train in audit prep," she said. "Like you did." I smiled. "Then let's start tomorrow." She's now one of our top specialists. And I know, without a doubt, that she'll go further than I ever did. So yeah, maybe it started with a tyrant. Maybe it was fueled by rage. But in the end, this story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming our power, protecting each other, and rebuilding something better from the ashes. If you've ever been in a workplace where someone made you feel small, remember, you're not alone. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one decision, to change everything. By the time the quarterly review rolled around, we were setting a new bar for the company. Department metrics were through the roof: on-time deliveries up by 28%, rework rates down by 35%, customer satisfaction at an all-time high. But beyond the numbers, what truly mattered to me was watching the people who had once walked away in frustration now walk in with pride. That was the win. During our quarterly presentation, the CEO, Robert, asked if I would co-present with him. Normally, the executive team handled these reviews solo, but he wanted to showcase the transformation our department had undergone as a case study for the entire company. As I stepped into the conference room packed with senior managers, engineers, and board members, I spotted Lena sitting in the front row, her notebook in hand, eyes shining. Behind her were the others: Marcus, Anya, Jorg, all with that same quiet confidence. When I took the MIC, I opened with this. 7 months ago, our department fell apart. Not because of incompetence. Not because of laziness. But because of leadership that didn't lead, it controlled, it belittled, and it destroyed morale. Today, I'm not here to talk about what went wrong. I'm here to show you what happens when people are empowered instead of punished. The room was silent. I clicked to the first slide: our department's performance under Felix's tenure. Declining metrics. High turnover. HR complaints. Missed milestones. Then I clicked to the next: our current data, every category showing dramatic improvement. There was no need to spell it out. By the end of the presentation, we had not only inspired applause, we sparked a company-wide re-evaluation of leadership styles. Other departments began sending their team leads to shadow our processes. HR requested my input on new management training programs. I even got asked to help redesign the onboarding flow for new hires across the company. It wasn't about ego. I didn't care about the attention. But it was validation. Not for me, but for everyone who stayed. Everyone who stood up when it was hardest. Everyone who believed things could get better. A few weeks later, something incredible happened. I got an invitation to speak at a leadership summit hosted by one of our biggest clients. They'd read about our turnaround in a shared industry publication and wanted me to speak on people-first leadership during crisis. I was floored. I mean me. A guy who started in the factory floor 7 years ago, who once got yelled at for not stacking parts fast enough. And yet, there I was. Flying out to represent not just my company, but my entire department and everything we stood for. The speech went well. Better than well. I talked about the cost of silence. The price of allowing small abuses to grow into cultural cancers. And I talked about the power of accountability, not just the kind that fires someone like Felix, but the kind that keeps people like me honest too. Afterward, a dozen department heads approached me to talk shop. A few even offered consulting gigs on the side. I politely declined, but not before taking their cards. It never hurts to be prepared. And back home, things kept getting better. One afternoon, I walked into the office to find the entire team gathered around a whiteboard, debating the best way to streamline our new quality checks. No one had told them to do it. No manager was pushing. They were just engaged. That's when it hit me. This was no longer my team. It was our team. That kind of ownership, the emotional buy-in, it couldn't be forced. It could only be earned. And it was the strongest foundation any department could hope for. A few months later, we received news that we had won the Internal Excellence in Leadership Award, an honor rarely given outside the executive track. Along with it came an invitation to join the company's Strategic Innovation Board, essentially the think tank responsible for long-term direction. I brought Lena with me to the first meeting. She didn't say much, just observed, took notes, and whispered sharp observations that made me realize how much smarter she was than I had been at her age. Later that night, over post-meeting drinks with a few board members, someone asked me, "So, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I thought about it for a long moment. And then I said, "Wherever I can keep making sure the right people are heard." They nodded. It wasn't the kind of answer that screamed ambition, but it was the truth. Because I hadn't fought to climb a ladder. I fought to fix what was broken. And I wanted to keep doing that for as long as people would let me. As for Felix, the last I heard, he'd been applying to mid-level managerial jobs in different industries, trying to rebrand himself. But word travels fast, especially when a reference check leads to someone who's got receipts. I never bothered following up. His fate wasn't my concern anymore. But every once in a while, I'd get a message from a stranger on LinkedIn. "Hey, I heard what happened at your company. Thanks for standing up for your team." Or, "Your story inspired me to finally speak up about the way my manager treats us." And those were the messages that reminded me. Sometimes, a story isn't just a story. Sometimes, it's a match. And when enough matches spark in enough places, you get a fire that no one can put out. We didn't just get rid of a bad boss. We changed the culture. We raised the bar. And along the way, we proved something important, that you don't have to choose between kindness and strength. The best leaders have both. And the best teams, they build each other up. Always. Months passed. Our success wasn't just a flash in the pan, it became our new baseline. And we didn't stop there. One of the first long-term projects I greenlit was a mentorship program, pairing new hires with experienced team members, not just for technical guidance, but for emotional and professional support. I assigned Lena to oversee it. She built it from scratch, turning it into a case study that HR wanted to replicate company-wide. It was surreal watching her in meetings now, confident, composed, the same young woman who had once sobbed over a cup of coffee because some egotistical man had tried to break her spirit. I wasn't just proud. I was grateful. And my other co-workers? Marcus took the lead on supply chain optimization and ended up saving us hundreds of thousands of euros by renegotiating vendor contracts. Anya helped develop a training manual for cross-departmental collaboration. Even Jorg, who had once been quiet and skeptical, found his voice in process improvement meetings, regularly suggesting changes that increased efficiency by double-digit percentages. The ripple effects of that one moment, of all of us walking out, kept spreading. Not just within our team, but in how other departments started handling their own issues. You could feel the shift in the air. People weren't just doing their jobs anymore. They believed again. Believed in their value. Believed they had a voice. Believed that someone would listen. And I made damn sure I always did. Then came the annual company summit. It was a big deal, held at the Capitol, hosted in one of the swankiest convention halls we'd ever seen. Hundreds of employees from across the continent attended, with panels, workshops, and awards. Our department was nominated for Best Team Turnaround. Not surprising, but I didn't expect much fanfare. But when they called our name, the applause was thunderous. We walked on stage, all of us together, no hierarchy. No one trailing behind. Just a unified team standing tall under the spotlights. Robert, the CEO, came up afterward to give me a handshake, but instead pulled me in for a hug. He whispered, "You've done more than I ever expected. Thank you for not letting this place fall apart." I just smiled and said, "It wasn't just me." Because it wasn't. It was every single person who had the courage to walk out and the resilience to walk back in. Every person who chose integrity over fear. Who stayed not out of desperation, but because they saw what we were building was worth it. We were no longer just a department. We were a family. A year later, I sat in my office with the morning light casting long shadows across the desk. I sipped my coffee, scrolling through emails, when a new one pinged in my inbox. Subject: a thank you from someone you don't know. I opened it. It was from a young woman who had just joined another factory office in our network. She'd heard about what had happened through the mentorship program, how a team had stood up against toxic leadership and won. She said she'd been doubting herself, on the verge of quitting after being berated by a supervisor, but after hearing our story, she filed a complaint instead. The manager was investigated and let go. She was now being mentored by Anya. The last line of her message stuck with me. Sometimes, knowing someone else fought back makes you brave enough to do the same. I stared at the screen for a long time. Because in that moment, I realized something. We hadn't just changed our company. We had changed lives. And it had all started with one act of courage. One refusal to stay silent. One team walking out on a bad boss, and walking back in for something better. Today, our department is known across the company as the gold standard. Other teams study our methods. Our processes are taught in internal leadership training. We get interns lining up, hoping to be placed with us. And best of all, that 15% raise? It stuck. It was baked into the new compensation model for every employee in the department. No one had to ask. No one had to beg. It was simply understood: when people are treated right, they give you their best. And when they give you their best, everyone wins. I still remember that Tuesday like it was yesterday. Felix yelling at Lena. 3 resignations before lunch. That moment of silence when I told him I was quitting too. And the look on his face when he saw Robert standing behind me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is not okay. This is not leadership. And we deserve better." We didn't just get better jobs. We built a better workplace. And that's something worth fighting for. I've been behind the wheel for over a decade now, long-haul trucker, CDL certified, clocking more miles than most people fly in a year. Over time, you learn to expect the unexpected on the road. But what happened the other night? That was a different kind of mess entirely. And it all started with a $17 parking space. Now, for those of you who don't live your life hopping from state line to state line in an 18-wheeler, let me explain a bit about how things work. Truck stops across the country, especially the bigger chains, have adopted a pay-to-park model. Usually, it's a section of the lot, maybe 10 to 20%, set aside for drivers willing to drop some cash for the guarantee of a spot. Depending on the stop, that fee ranges between $15 and $25. It's not exactly pocket change when you're running loads back-to-back and trying to maximize your take-home pay, but sometimes, it's a necessity. See, that night I was heading into Texas on a late delivery, a drop scheduled for somewhere around midnight, and the location was notorious for running behind schedule. I knew from experience that I wouldn't be out of there until well after 2 a.m. Trying to find a free parking spot after that kind of shift? Forget it. That's why I swung by my favorite truck stop around 3:30 p.m. earlier that day and paid for a reserved parking spot. The woman working the desk, Maria, was someone I'd met before. A no-nonsense type, always professional. I let her know I had a late-night drop but would be back as soon as the delivery was complete. I asked if I could prepay for the night so I'd have a guaranteed space when I returned. She said it was fine, took down my details, and made a note in the log that the spot was paid and reserved, even if I was temporarily away from it. I even got a printed receipt, which I stashed in my glove box. It was a small thing, but it felt like locking in some peace of mind. At 11:15 p.m. sharp, I pulled out of the lot and headed toward my delivery location, a meat packing plant about 20 minutes up the highway. As expected, unloading was a disaster. Long wait, disorganized staff, and a few moments where I nearly fell asleep in the cab while waiting for a door assignment. By the time the truck was empty and the paperwork was signed, it was closing in on 2:30 in the morning. All I wanted was to crawl into my sleeper and knock out for a few hours before heading back on the road. But when I rolled back into the truck stop lot, something was immediately off. Every single reserved spot was taken. Now look, I've been doing this long enough to know that mistakes happen. Sometimes another driver takes a reserved spot thinking it's unclaimed. Sometimes the staff forgets to update their records. I wasn't angry right away. Just tired and confused. So I pulled into the fuel island where they often have drivers wait temporarily and called the front desk. Maria wasn't there, but the night manager, Derek, picked up. "Hey, this is Ben," I said. "I prepaid for a reserved spot earlier." Maria marked it in the system. "I just got back from my run, but all the spots are taken. Can you check your log?" He took my info and looked it up. "Yeah, I see it here," he said. "Spot R12. It's definitely marked as sold. So someone's in it," I said flatly. "Looks like it," he sighed. "Hold on. Let me send David out to check plates." A few minutes passed. From where I was parked at the fuel island, I had a clear line of sight to the reserved row. I watched David, the night shift lot attendant, walking from truck to truck with a flashlight and clipboard, comparing plates to the reservation list. It didn't take long for him to stop in front of R12 and start banging on the driver's door. That's when things escalated. The guy who eventually opened the door was a company driver for one of the most recognizable names in the industry. You've probably seen their bright orange trailers barreling down the freeway. But what really caught my eye was what the guy was holding. In one hand, a green bottle, definitely a Heineken. In the other, a smoking pipe I won't describe too carefully here, but it wasn't for tobacco, I'll tell you that much. I rolled down my window just in time to catch the tail end of David's warning: "You're parked in a reserved space without a reservation. You need to move now or we'll have to tow you." The driver exploded. He started cursing, shouting something about how he got here first and that no one owns the damn lot. When David stood his ground and mentioned calling the police, the driver slammed the door in his face. That was the last straw. Derek called the police, and I just sat there, watching this mess unfold with my arms folded, still groggy but now wide awake. Here's the thing, I used to drive for this company. I know their policies better than most. I know they have a zero-tolerance policy for alcohol, drugs, and weapons in the cab. Even a bottle of beer is enough to get a driver terminated. And this guy, he wasn't just carrying a Heineken and a pipe. When the police finally showed up and got into the truck, they found enough illegal substances to make a DEA agent raise an eyebrow and a handgun under the seat that was loaded and unregistered. He was hauled off in cuffs, kicking and screaming. His truck hooked up to a tow within 20 minutes and taken to an impound lot. As soon as things calmed down, I drove back to R12 and parked my rig, finally. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I was crashing fast. But there was one last thing I had to do before passing out. I made a call. The company he drove for has a safety department hotline. It's a 24/7 line, meant for reporting accidents, violations, or anything else that might pose a liability to the company. I gave them all the info: his truck number, name if they needed it, location, police involvement, the whole shebang. The woman on the other end of the line thanked me for reporting it. She sounded tired, but when I told her everything they found in his cab, especially the alcohol and the other not-so-legal items, she perked up. "That's a guaranteed termination," she said. "He won't be driving for us, or anyone, again." That was music to my ears. And here's why. When you're out here on the road every day, you come to rely on some level of decency from the people around you. We all work long hours, eat junk food out of gas stations, and sleep in parking lots that smell like diesel and stale coffee. There's an unspoken code among drivers: respect the grind. Don't take another man's spot, especially not one he paid for. This guy broke that code. Worse, he acted like it didn't matter. Like he was entitled to everything: my space, his drugs, his beer, even the right to threaten someone doing their job. And now, he's unemployed. That $17 spot? Probably the most expensive mistake he's made in his career. I finally shut down the engine, released the air brakes, and let out the longest exhale I'd been holding in for the past few hours. The air in my cab was thick with diesel fumes, tension, and exhaustion. But under all of that, something deeper lingered: vindication. As I reclined my seat and started prepping to sleep, I kept thinking about how much worse that night could have gone. What if I had just parked in a random spot to avoid conflict and got ticketed or booted myself? What if I hadn't had the receipt or cleared things with Maria earlier that day? What if, worst of all, that guy had gone completely off the rails with the drugs, the weapon, and his attitude? It made my skin crawl. Sleep came in fragments that night. Truck stop lights blazed through my curtains. The sound of the tow truck's hydraulic winch replayed in my head like a lullaby of karma. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dude's expression when the police knocked on his cab and asked him to step out. He really thought he was untouchable. And for a minute, maybe he was. Until the hammer dropped. Around 9 a.m., I got up and headed inside the truck stop. I needed coffee, badly. Maria was back on duty and already at the front desk. As soon as she saw me, she waved me over. "Hey," she said, "I heard what happened." Derek filled me in. "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing sleep out of my eyes. Didn't expect to spend the night watching someone get hauled off in cuffs, but here we are. She shook her head. "It's getting worse lately. People just think they can do whatever they want." "I don't get it," I said. "It's a $17 spot. You don't pay, you don't park. Simple." Maria leaned closer. "He tried to reserve the same spot at 5 p.m., after you left for your delivery. We told him it was already sold. He kept insisting that if the spot was empty, it should be available." "So he knew," I said. "Oh yeah," she confirmed. "Knew damn well. He just didn't care." That infuriated me more than anything else. He didn't stumble into the wrong spot by accident. He had full knowledge that it was reserved, and he took it anyway. That made this a premeditated case of entitlement, not just ignorance or confusion. I headed back out with my coffee and fired up the truck, preparing for the next leg of my route. As I sat there waiting for the cab to warm up, I decided to make one more call, this time, to a buddy of mine who still worked over at that company, the one with the orange trailers. He picked up on the second ring. "Yo, Ben," he said, already chuckling. "You calling about what I think you're calling about? You heard already? Man, the group chats are going crazy this morning. Word is some jackass got caught with booze and, well, some not-so-legal recreationals in his cab. Had a gun too. Got picked up last night. They're calling it the truck stop takedown." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're kidding." Wish I was. Safety got the full report. Apparently, he'd already been on their radar. You just lit the final fuse. That surprised me. Wait, he's done stuff like this before? Nothing as dramatic, my friend admitted, but he's had a few marks on his record. Late deliveries. Minor damage claims. One complaint about road rage. So this was the cherry on top. Exactly. HR didn't waste any time. They terminated him by 9 a.m. That was less than 7 hours after the police got involved. But that's not all, my friend continued. Apparently, he violated his lease agreement with the company. They'll probably pursue him for the tow fees, impound charges, and any legal damage from the bust. He could lose his CDL, I said flatly. Wouldn't be surprised, my friend said. Honestly, he's lucky he didn't get shot. You don't slam a door on a cop and live to tell it, depending on the city. He wasn't wrong. The fact that this guy thought he could scream at a uniformed officer and still come out ahead told me everything I needed to know about his judgment. We hung up a few minutes later. I rolled out of the lot and back onto the highway, headed toward Oklahoma with a fresh load and a mind still buzzing from everything that had happened. Somewhere behind me, a driver who thought rules didn't apply to him was waking up in a holding cell, probably hungover, definitely unemployed. What I didn't realize at the time, though, was that my role in this story wasn't quite over. A week later, I got an email from someone in the safety department of the company. They wanted to thank me again for my call and offered me a $100 fuel card for doing the right thing. I almost didn't accept it. I didn't report him for a reward. But the gesture was appreciated. Then, in the same message, they told me something that made my jaw drop. Based on your report and the police documentation, we've forwarded this incident to the FMCSA for review. For the uninitiated, that's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, basically the governing body for all commercial motor vehicle operations in the U.S. If they investigate and decide you're a threat to public safety, they can suspend or revoke your CDL. That meant the guy's trucking career might be over. Not just with this company, but permanently. And honestly, good. The roads are dangerous enough without reckless people taking up space on them. Every day we face fatigue, erratic drivers, unpredictable weather, tight deadlines, and insane expectations from dispatchers and customers alike. What we don't need are people abusing substances, ignoring safety rules, and picking fights over parking spots they didn't pay for. The FMCSA forwarding stunned me for a moment. That one poor decision, trying to bully his way into a $17 parking spot, might have just cost that driver everything. That's when it fully hit me. This wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. It was about the kind of domino effect that selfish, reckless behavior can have when you're in an industry built on trust, discipline, and protocol. One person's shortcut had set fire to their entire career. A week later, while I was fueling up at a Love's in Illinois, I struck up a conversation with another driver who worked for the same orange trailer company. Small world. He had just finished orientation and was still getting routed with a mentor. "You hear about that guy down in Kentucky?" he asked me, half laughing. "Drunk, parked illegally, got busted with a weapon and, stuff?" I nodded, lips curling. "Yeah. I heard. Some people just aren't cut out for this life." He chuckled. "Not with that attitude, they're not." I didn't say anything else. There was no need to insert myself in the story again. It was making the rounds on its own. Later that night, I thought back to that moment in the fuel island. I remembered how my hands gripped the steering wheel as I watched someone blatantly occupying my legally reserved space. I remembered the initial frustration, the disbelief, and the choice I made to do it by the book. Not to shout, not to retaliate, but to report it calmly, clearly, and through the proper channels. And that's what made the difference. Because in this business, there are rules. Some are written in company handbooks. Some are in regulations. Others, they're unspoken, but understood by all the pros. Don't cut corners that put others in danger. Don't take what's not yours. And never, ever screw over a fellow driver trying to do things right. But this guy did all three. And he got exactly what was coming to him. By the third week, I was back in the same area. Not at the same truck stop, but just off the same interstate. Curiosity got the better of me, so I made a detour during my 30-minute break. I rolled past that old lot, and everything looked the same except for one new sign. Taped in the office window was a freshly printed sheet of paper that read, "All reserved parking is strictly enforced. Illegally parked trucks will be towed at driver's expense." I smiled. Maria noticed me from the window and waved me in. She handed me another hot coffee on the house this time and said, "You started a revolution." "Just doing what's right," I said. "You'd be surprised how few people do that anymore." We stood there for a moment, the din of the diesel engines humming like a background score. Then she said something I'll never forget. He looked me in the eye before he walked out in cuffs and said, "It's just a parking spot." And I told him, she continued, "It's not the parking spot that got you here, it's your attitude." That stuck with me. Because she was right. It wasn't just a parking spot. It was a symbol of respect, of accountability, of doing your job like a professional in an industry where millions of lives depend on people like us showing up, staying alert, and being responsible. Later that month, I got another message, this one from an FMCSA liaison who'd taken my statement earlier. They wanted me to confirm the timeline and share any evidence I still had. I uploaded the receipt, the texts with the manager, and the time-stamped call logs. "Thank you for your cooperation," the email read. "This has been added to an open case file. Should we need further testimony, we'll reach out." I never heard from them again. But I knew what that meant. The case was moving. They were taking it seriously. And honestly, it was comforting. Not because I wanted to ruin someone's life, but because I wanted to believe that this system worked. That professionalism mattered. That we weren't out here on our own, living by the jungle law of truck stops and late-night deliveries. About 2 months after everything went down, I received a voicemail from someone I didn't recognize. When I played it back, it was the owner of the orange trailer company. "I just wanted to thank you personally," the voice said. "What you did helped protect our company's name and standards. That driver was on the edge for a while, but your actions likely prevented something much worse." He paused, then added something that brought a tightness to my chest. "We're adding a new section to our orientation training about professionalism at stops. Your story will be included." Anonymously, of course. I stood in silence, phone still in hand. That was it. That was the final twist in the story. Because the story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing someone for a parking spot. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, no more. No more entitlement. No more reckless behavior. No more disregard for the rules that keep us all alive and working. Just because we live most of our lives on the road doesn't mean we live without boundaries. Somewhere, that guy is probably trying to get his license reinstated or applying to some bottom-barrel company willing to overlook his history. But me, I just keep driving. Every mile, a reminder that sometimes, being the calm one, the one who follows the rules, the one who keeps their receipts, means you're the one who wins.